What is up, Hawk fans? I want to give you guys an update to the transfer portal for the Iowa Hawkeyes. Have you guys completely covered every step of the way. So just a few names. I think I actually recorded a video earlier last week, but I didn't end up posting it because I knew there was going to be some other names that came down the pipeline, and I wanted to wait a little bit to give like a more encompassing summary of who Iowa is after and who they have lost. So let's talk first about who they are after. So Iowa is openly going after defensive linemen. There is one individual that they already received a visit from the game against Nebraska. I actually think that if Iowa landed him, this would be a really good get. I think Iowa State is after him as well. Iowa State pretty much recruits the same guys that Iowa does, honestly. But his name is, let's see here, Langdon Kitchen. And he's from a Division II school. Let's see what the name is. West Missouri State. He's got great size. I think he's got 1 or 2 years of eligibility remaining. So this would be a guy that Iowa could keep in the program for a couple of years. It says that he is from the class of 2023. So yeah, he'd be going into his junior year, I believe. And his transfer portal ranking is an 87, which is not bad. I think Iowa can definitely win this recruitment. He's got great size at 6'6", 265 pounds. It would be a really nice depth piece to go along with. Pace is the other prospect. He would be a senior, I believe. Again, great size. He's more of a defensive tackle prospect. From the state of Illinois. So Iowa definitely looks good there. They do well at recruiting guys who come from the state of Illinois. 6'5", 285 pounds. That would immediately give Iowa some depth, some size. And then, of course, the quarterback position. Iowa has been linked to Miller Moss out of USC. I would give Iowa like a, 10 to 20% chance. And him, I mean, he'd be coming in as a senior. I don't know if he would have a COVID year or a COOF year. I don't think he would. So if he came in, I mean, it would be to land the starting spot, which Iowa has said that's when they were asked about whether they're looking for more of a long-term developmental prospect that can kind of be in the waiting wings, or go after a guy that's an immediate day one starter. They said they're open to both, and I think that's the correct answer. If you can land somebody like Miller Moss, you land them, plain and simple, because you want the best quarterback. And at the end of the day, and I think Tim Lester has done a good job of this. Immediately upon arriving at Iowa, you have to have a strong, competitive quarterback room. That's the only way that you get the best results. And I think he did that well in his first year by getting guys like Jackson Stratton and Brendan Sullivan, who had Division I experience, who, maybe weren't the most talented guys coming out of high school, but were talented nonetheless and could immediately give some competition in the room. Interesting. I mean, if Iowa landed a guy like Miller Moss, who, like I said, I give them like a 10 to 20% chance. I mean, the good news is that the one selling point that Iowa has is that they can use in a positive manner the fact that they do have a relatively new offensive coordinator to overshadow Iowa's lack of success, and he can use the improvement that they've already seen in the first year upon his arrival at Iowa. but also obviously the fact that they have playing time available, and that it's completely a wide open position for them, and that definitely is a positive in their own right. The thing with the quarterback position is ultimately there's only one guy that can see the bulk of snaps. Now, of course, if you're like Iowa, you end up having 2 years in a row where multiple guys, at least 3 quarterbacks, see the field, but that's not how Iowa wants it, of course. And in years past, that I would say that is not the norm for them. But but it would be interesting to see if Iowa landed a guy like him if Brendan Sullivan transferred. I don't think Jackson Stratton would transfer because he has a few years of eligibility remaining, and I actually think Jackson Stratton could be a long-term option. Maybe not next year, but down the line. The other prospect, so that would be interesting. I mean, I don't know the answer to that. I'll put it to you this way, though. I do think that there would be a good chance that Brendan Sullivan would transfer out if Iowa landed a high-profile guy like Jackson Stratton. I mean, the guy left Northwestern for a lot less when he was basically the presumptive starter. The guy that Iowa has been linked to is Jackson Arnold out of Oklahoma. Again, I'd probably put the same percentages on him, maybe a little bit less. Of the two, I think I would prefer Miller Moss. I think he probably fits Iowa a little bit better. I'm just cleaning my screen in the background. But those are some of the guys that Iowa has been linked to. I'm sure there's other names. I don't pay for all these insider websites. So if there's other names that you have heard Iowa being linked to, go ahead and comment their names below. Some of the guys that Iowa has lost to the transfer portal. Well, let me go back. A key position that Iowa needs to at least land one guy is the wide receiver position, plain and simple. They need at least one other option to land there. And I unfortunately, I think that's going to be the toughest, not even the quarterback position. The wide receiver position is going to be the toughest position for Iowa to land certain caliber guys. Just because Iowa, the culture of what Iowa is, the history under Kirk Ferentz, the lack of success, many things. I think it's going to be hard until it's proven that wide receivers can be successful in Tim Lester's scheme. I think it's going to be difficult for Iowa to land a certain caliber guy at the wide receiver position. Some guys that have transferred, Marco Lainez, which is the main one I want to talk about today, just announced either this morning or last night that he was going to be transferring. Defensive lineman Caden Crawford, who was going into his redshirt junior season next year, transferred. When he was coming out of high school, I actually really did like his upside, and I was always kind of paying attention to see how his development was going. I'm not really sure why this year he transferred per se, because I think that there's a pathway. I mean, Aaron Graves, unless he decides to go pro this year, which I think is definitely a possibility, assuming he comes back, that's one defensive line spot that's locked up. Behind him, the next guy that's kind of in line is Jeremiah Pittman. And, of course, Iowa is attacking the transfer portal at the defensive line position. But, Ethan Herkett might return. I don't know if Caden Crawford was seen more as a D tackle or DN. I think he was seen more as a D tackle at this stage in his career. But I thought there was a pathway. I mean, if you have a really good offseason and you prove that you're capable of playing, you'll see the field. But nonetheless, he has hit the transfer portal. Iowa has 105 scholarship or 105 roster spots that they got to get down to. it's also important to keep in mind that Iowa has a really talented underclassmen group of defensive linemen. And I think that that's also something to keep an eye on. Ethan Herkett might return. We'll see what happens with that. But of course, Iowa will have to depart from Deontay Craig, I believe. I'm not really sure why Ethan Herkett can return, but Deontay Craig cannot. But I digress. Iowa lost a tight end. Iowa has lost two tight ends. One in Johnny Pascuzzi, which was an upperclassman. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining. That's not really a surprise. Iowa convinced him to come back last year when he was actually contemplating going to the transfer portal. I mean, he really just was a depth piece. The main tight ends, obviously, were Luke Lachey, Addison Ostrenga, and Zach Ortworth. So I don't think that that's a huge loss. And plus, Iowa, Abdul Hodge has been recruiting the tight end position really well. It's one of the best recruited positions the last couple of years. Tight end Grant Leeper, who's a redshirt freshman, and he actually was a late get in the 2023 recruiting class as a gray shirt, which meant that he could not be on scholarship until the start of the football season, I believe. There was like some stipulation to it. It was not a full-blown scholarship. It was, I think it was a gray shirt or a blue shirt scholarship, where he wouldn't be on scholarship until a certain amount of time at Iowa. I really liked his upside. He had tremendous athleticism, and of all the recruits, this is probably the one that I'm the most disappointed about. That has announced their transfer portal intentions. I kind of hope that Iowa is able to convince him to come back, because, like I said, he really did have strong upside. So what it is he would pay for his schooling during, let's see here, during the fall semester of 2023, but going on scholarship in January. So Indiana also extended that offer late in the process. He was seen as a very high upside prospect. But again, I mean, some of this, what you guys need to understand, and it's kind of hard even for me to know for sure, is the fact that Iowa has to get down to 105 spots. And there's not as much of a possibility any longer to hold on to prospects just merely because they have super high upside. And so that's going to be one of the things that is very interesting about how programs go about this, is what their tactic, what their viewpoint is on how many guys they can kind of take risks on and kind of allow to be developmental, high upside guys that they work for multiple years on, and it's also just interesting, like, Grant Leeper comes to Iowa as a gray shirt. He knew he was a developmental prospect. I mean, he had only played football for 1 year, and it's like, you come to Iowa and what you expected to see, it was highly unlikely you were going to see the field in definitely not your first year, let alone your second year. I don't know what some of these kids expect. Who knows what his thoughts are on this. But the fact is that the landscape of college sports has just changed so much, and a lot of kids no longer have patience to wait. Now, Iowa is better than most schools at being able to retain guys that are willing to wait for multiple years. And, we saw it with Jay Higgins. We've seen it with some of the linebackers that are still on the Iowa roster, Carson Sherrar and Jaden Harrell. But, by and large, that's just not the case any longer these days, guys. So it's unfortunate that Iowa lost him. I really did like his upside, but the good news is that Iowa is still very healthy in the tight end room. They have a talented underclassmen group of guys. The freshmen that will be coming in this year: Eli Johnson, Mason Woods, Thomas Meyer, all high 3-star, 4-star guys. Last year's class with Gavin Hoffman, 4-star, one of the highest recruited tight ends that Iowa has landed in recent years, along with Thomas Meyer for this year's class. And then they also they were able to steal out of the state of Nebraska Michael Burt, who was a high 3-star, borderline 4-star prospect. So, all right, guys, just to wrap this up, let me talk about the quarterback position really quickly. I told you guys that I gave Marco Lainez a 40% chance to transfer out of Iowa. And I am not surprised by this. When you have paid attention to Iowa sports in the manner that I do for so long, you can kind of see these things before they happen. You can see the tea leaves, and he just seemed like a guy that was going to transfer. He had an injury issue. He saw the field last year. In the bowl game, did okay, and then was shelved back on the Iowa pedestal, or on the shelves, shelved on the shelves for this current season, and has battled injuries. There's a new offensive coordinator. He committed to Iowa with Brian Ferentz. There's just all kinds of things. And, with Jackson Stratton seeing the field and Iowa now effectively having him ahead of Marco Lainez, I could see from his vantage point why being at Iowa was no longer the most optimal pathway to seeing the field. Now, the fact is that if he was head and shoulders better than all the other quarterbacks on the roster, he would have seen the field by now. And that's just not the case. I did like his upside. I think he was actually one of the better quarterback commits that Iowa had landed out of high school in recent memory. His ratings did not reflect that because he was committed to Iowa for so long. If you guys remember, his quarterback coach in Connecticut was the same quarterback coach that Nate Stanley went to. And so there was that connection there from Iowa to that Tony Raciapi or whatever his name is. There was that connection there. And so he was committed to Iowa for a long time, but to Brian Ferentz. And so, I still did like his potential. I liked what he was able to do in the bowl game against Tennessee. And I told you guys, for what it's worth, I thought he did better than Deuce Hogan did in that game, or whoever Iowa. I can't even remember whose quarterback that was for Iowa. It was so abysmal of a performance. But the fact is that, and this is really what it boils down to, guys. Tim Lester wants to get his guys in there, and I think that it is painfully obvious that he did not like the quarterbacks that Brian Ferentz recruited. James Razor was immediately turned over to the quarterback position, and now Marco Lainez, who is also a Brian Ferentz commit, is gone. All the guys that Tim Lester got were ahead of him. Brendan Sullivan, Jackson Stratton, and they weren't even guys that were recruited out of high school to Iowa. On top of that, you have two freshman quarterbacks coming in that are Tim Lester guys, in Jimmy Sullivan and Ryan Fitzgerald, who's Pat Fitzgerald's son. So I can't remember if Jimmy Sullivan was committed before Tim Lester got there or after. It is here. Sullivan committed to Iowa in December of 2023 before Kirk Ferentz had hired an offense coordinator to replace Brian Ferentz. So Sullivan is not necessarily a Tim Lester guy, but Tim Lester was okay with him, or else he would have, believe you me, he would have had Jimmy Sullivan in a variety of ways annexed from his commitment from Iowa by either recruiting another big name or actively being on the recruiting trail. So even though he's not like a full Tim Lester guy, he still is a Tim Lester guy because Tim Lester obviously evaluated his tape, met with him, and if he was not okay with Jimmy Sullivan's upside, he would have went after a different quarterback for a scholarship spot. But he did still get Fitzgerald, which I would say is a full-blown Tim Lester guy. So that is just, nonetheless, that's the fact of the matter. And I'm okay with that. You know, Brian Ferentz sucked at landing quarterbacks. He sucked at developing quarterbacks. And here, I will show you guys just how bad he was at developing high school quarterbacks. I posted this after seeing it somewhere else. I can't remember where I saw it, and I copy and pasted it, and it's so true. Let's see. This was from Hawk Insider, or not Hawk Insider, but not Hawk Report. What is it? Oh my gosh, Central. All these websites called Hawk Fanatic, Hawk Central, Hawk whatever. So the Hawkeyes are well aware of their struggles at the quarterback position in the last couple of years. The last quarterback that hit for the Hawkeyes coming out of high school was Nate Stanley in 2016. The rest of the quarterbacks, ? Well, here is a recent rundown. 2017, Peyton Manziel finished career at Abilene Christian. 2018, Spencer Petras finished career at Utah State. Now, of course, Spencer Petras did play a lot of games for Iowa. But it wasn't like a super successful tenure. But he comparatively was probably the most successful out of high school quarterback under Brian Ferentz. Alex Padilla finished career at SMU. Deuce Hogan transferred to Kentucky and now at New Mexico State. In 2020, 2021, Joey Labus transferred to Central Michigan and is back in the transfer portal. After starting a full year there, which is interesting. Carson May transferred to Wyoming and is now a tight end at Abilene Christian. That's interesting. 2023, Marco Lainez, still in program. Of course he's not. He just transferred or put his name in the transfer portal. 2024, James Razor moved to wide receiver as a true freshman and is now in the transfer portal. Now, here's the thing, guys. I would actually be happier if these quarterbacks went to these other schools and were successful. The only guys that have had like decent success has been Spencer Petras. He had an okay year. Okay, let me pull up his numbers here. And you know, Joey Labus went to Central Michigan. And I gave you guys his stats in a previous video. But it's not as though they went to these other schools and dominated and were one of the top 50 quarterbacks in the country. That's not the case. So Labus had 1,114 yards, 7 touchdowns, 7 INTs for a 34 QBR. And a 58.8% completion percentage with a pure quarterback rating, just quarterback, passing the football, 122.9. It would be one thing if if one or two of these quarterbacks went elsewhere, or a few of them, and had success like we've seen at the wide receiver position, because then it would show that Iowa can maybe even develop the position decently and evaluate talent decently. You know, what we saw with Charlie Jones and Tyrone Tracy did have the switch to running back, but we've seen Iowa wide receivers go elsewhere and have success. Not probably the most successful would be Charlie Jones, but success nonetheless. Spencer Petras passed for 2,315 yards, 17 touchdowns, 11 INTs with a QBR of 41 and a completion percentage of 65.4 with a pure quarterback rating passing the football of 135.3, which was his highest of any of his 6 years in college football. But none of the quarterbacks have had any success. That is the problem on any level, minus Spencer Petras, who in his 6th year experienced somewhat success for a team that was absolutely terrible and basically allowed him to throw the football 327 times, okay? So this shows that not only did these guys transfer, but it also showed that Brian Ferentz did not know how to develop or evaluate quarterbacks. And that's a problem coming out of high school. And that was not always the case. You know, Ken O'Keefe would land mid-tier 3-star guys and find a way to turn them into decent Big Ten quarterbacks. You know, you had James Vandenberg, who had decent years. You had Ricky Stanzi, who had decent years. You know, Nate Stanley was during the Ken O'Keefe. Ken O'Keefe came back as a quarterback coach for that time to help Brian Ferentz in his first couple of years at Iowa. You know, C.J. Beathard. These are all guys that Iowa landed out of high school and developed. You know, Drew Tate. So they've done it before, or rather, Ken O'Keefe did it before, but Brian Ferentz could not do it. He sucked at doing it. And so what I'm getting at, guys, just to wrap this video as we're approaching 30 minutes, I am okay. Yes, was there some upside that I could see with Marco Lainez? Sure. But ultimately, I am okay with Tim Lester overhauling the whole freaking room in an attempt to get the room better, because obviously it was not good enough. Now, the problem that I see, though, is that Iowa is getting into this, and I think a lot of schools, this is the case, especially like upper mid to approaching the highest tier schools, okay? So in other words, not the Penn States or Ohio States or or Alabamas or not those teams, okay? But even those teams, this happens. Kids are not willing to wait in the transfer portal as much as they used to be willing to. And so it is increasingly, especially for schools like Iowa, becoming difficult to develop quarterbacks out of high school and be able to have the time to develop said quarterbacks, unless you are able to hit on a kid right out of high school who's ready to play year one. And so I am concerned that Iowa is not super concerned, but it's something to pay attention to, that Iowa is turning into this revolving door at quarterback where every year or couple of years they're going to have to bring in a transfer portal quarterback because they just don't have the guys that they recruited at high school. Either they transferred out or they're just not talented or ready to play. So we'll see how that happens. How that works out. We won't know until Tim Lester is a few years into his time at Iowa, if that's how long he stays at Iowa. But right now, that is definitely something that I'm paying attention to. I think it's very possible that Iowa becomes a situation much like what we've seen with Wisconsin, much like what we've seen with Minnesota. That's what I'm talking about with these mid-tier teams, if not high mid-tier teams that are trying to become elite teams that every year have a new quarterback, and there's varying levels of success with it. So we'll see what happens with that. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all situation, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on. Minnesota went to the transfer portal again, and this time they were successful. This time they got a good quarterback. So time will tell. Time will tell. But I do overall, just to wrap this up at 30-minute mark, I like the direction that Tim Lester is going. I am okay with him being able to bring in his own guys and out with the old and bring in the new. All right, guys, I will have a pregame or preview video for Iowa versus Missouri dropped here in the coming weeks. That was announced that Iowa will play Missouri in the Music City Bowl again, December 30th at 11:30 a.m. Missouri is ranked 19th. I think it's a pretty fair, evenly matched game, and I'm looking forward to that game. Of course, nowadays, any team that's a decent team that has NFL prospects will not have their full complement of guys, which I think is kind of stupid because especially if you do play in a decent bowl game, it's yet another game on a national level to be able to put good tape on film. Or to have documented. So, but that's just my opinion. That's a different conversation for a different day. Be sure to hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys for all your support. The last couple of videos have been very popular. Seems you guys really enjoy these kind of short form, quick road mic situations where I just get the mic out and start going off the cuff, talking about the transfer portal and recruiting. So I'll definitely keep doing more of those. I don't know if you guys have seen this new little ornament I got for my studio here. So anything I can do to add to the aroma, the ambiance of the videos. All right, guys, be sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. If there's anybody that Iowa has been linked to, comment below. Let's get this channel to 2,000 subscribers. And last but not least, DBAP, don't be a pussy willow and facts or feelings, because your feelings just don't matter. I love you, Hawk fans. See you guys next time. Bye-bye. Go Hawks.